And welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Jayme.
And I'm Marilyn Brown.
And today we are talking about a few different things. Did you want to start off with tarot or with iPhones?
I think let's start off with tarot and
Okay.
affirmation, kind of divination tools in general. So I wanted to talk about tarot cards and these tools because it's something that I actually really, really love and have been using for a long time, but I didn't. I I'm using these tools more intentionally now and finding them
Right.
extremely useful. And so I actually pulled it's not a tarot card, I pulled an affirmation card for us to share with you guys. So
Ooh.
this is the card that I pulled. This is actually from, oh, sorry, this is from Louise Hay's Power Thoughts card. So it says, Life is simple and easy. And the other side of the message is all that I need to know at any given moment is revealed to me. I trust myself and I trust life. All is well. So that was the card that I just pulled when I was just kind of sitting here and pulling over some of my tools, thinking about using them. And I've actually had this deck for, I don't even know, probably over a decade. Louise Hay actually just passed away. She was the pioneer of Hay House Publications, and she wrote some amazing books
Mm-hmm.
on just connecting with the self and really learning how to kind of look inward and thinking about the connection between mind, body, and spirit. And so for me, these are tools that I've had for a while because as a therapist, I'm always kind of looking for ways to help people, just kind of external things to kind of bring people back to that mindful message. The message on the card was perfect, that all is well. I have everything I need in this moment. And so that's kind of how I started using them. But then in the last couple of years, I've started learning more about actual tarot cards and learning about kind of that journey and been using those tools as well. So it's been really fun for me to kind of take something that I thought was just going to be okay. I have this deck in my office and I'll have a client pull a card and kind of give them a positive message on the way out the door to actually using it for something to really deepen my own journey inward. So
Yeah, it's funny. I'm looking around if people are watching this because I just moved a bunch of stuff, and I used to have a card actually on display. I'm gonna go get it. Just
okay.
hold for 2 seconds because I just
No
think it's funny.
problem. So this deck, while I'm holding, this Power Thought card deck is an affirmation deck. And so this is something to just kind of help you find your inner strength. Just kind of showing that to people while you
Nice.
got
So
your card.
I keep my favorite ones on. It's so funny because I had no idea you were going to do that, and then when you were doing it, I was like, "Oh my god, I have them too." I put them on my fridge so that I always see them multiple times
Yes.
a day. There's
Uh-huh.
three on my fridge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So my kind of life motto, and we've talked about it before, is life begins at the end of your comfort zone, and then be the change you wish to see in the world, Gandhi. And then when words are both true and kind, they can change our world, which is the Buddha.
Love it.
Yeah. So
So that's
I
that you've
thought that was
actually
really funny.
had. Yeah, so that's something that you've actually had in your space and kind of up and around. Why is that important to you? Why do you have those messages like around in your home?
um, for me, I'm a very sensory and emotion based person.
Hmm.
So I was lucky because I think just naturally the way I was raised and born, I'm much more of a present and future thinker. I rarely am in the past or focus on the past. And
Hmm.
when I do think about the past, I remember things more for their emotional content and not necessarily. I don't really see images and stuff like that. So I feel much more than I see, and I think that goes into language as well. I don't really remember um, things people say. I
Hmm.
mean, this is a really famous tweet. I remember more of how they made me feel and how they reacted to the
Hmm.
situation. So I like having quotes around because they put me in a different space that I'm not normally at. Because a lot of times I feel things, but I haven't really intellectualized them in a way that makes sense on a intellectual level in a lot of ways. And having those quotes helps me do that. And I'll be feeling a certain way, and I'll say, "Oh yeah, that's what this feeling actually means." And it just, I think, helps me stay balanced in a way between that intellectual and emotional place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting to me that's kind of how it's been useful to you. Because for me, I'm also a very emotional kind of processor, but I think that for me, visual is so important. And so seeing things in my space and kind of seeing things around is really that immediately can kind of bring me back to that place of like awareness pretty
Hmm.
quickly, and like where I'll actually be able to kind of recall, everything about an experience just in that moment. And so it really is, it's really able to help me bring things back to that mindful place pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's just nice. We've talked about this a lot. Of as you're in the journey, and we're always on the journey. Unless you're in a monastery where you're meditating hours a day and your whole life is about everything you do being mindful, it's just incredibly difficult to remind ourselves every moment to be mindful. And it's nice to just put different types of reminders around that just kind of put you into that place,
Mhm.
without you having to consciously always force yourself to be there, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like using cards, kind of going back to divination tools. I like using cards and using tarot cards and decks because it I think it really it's a way to set an intention to be open to things that we're not able to see ourselves. And not
Hmm.
necessarily meaning, meaning like, things on another plane, but just kind of a level of awareness that we're not
Right.
open to. I mean, it can be a deeper level, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. And so I think even just, for me, it's really cool when I'll have, I use this deck in session a lot called Miracles Now by Gabrielle Bernstein, and she's somebody that's in recovery, and it's just a really beautiful deck, and the messages are pretty quick and simple, but they always seem to resonate with what we talked about in session and where that client is at. And it's like every single time that happens, it just, really kind of confirms for me that there really is a space to deepen our awareness if we're open. And so I think having tools can allow us to be a little bit more open than we are in our own kind of intellectual, brains. Because we can be so focused on what we can see and on just kind of the data and on those things that I think it really limits our ability to find solutions and our ability to kind of find peace in challenging situations. And so for me, it's really been cool to kind of see that both for myself and for my clients that it helps kind of bring a level of awareness that we wouldn't have had access to.
Right. And what I love about what you're saying is you're using the word tool, and we talk about this all the time as well. In that, for me, specifically, tarot cards are a tool, and I think a lot of people have a preconceived notion that they're kind of this psychic thing, or a certain spiritual practice or magic. And no matter if you practice tarot cards as if they are a spirituality, or if they are magic, or whatever it is to you, it's really about how you use it and as a tool. Like for
Yeah.
me, I don't really know much about the actual reading of tarot cards. I just have always been drawn to the art that I see
Yes.
in various cards, and I just love the art used in various decks. And the whole reason we're having this conversation is because Alanis Morissette posted on Instagram a photo of a 90s, well, it's a tarot deck that someone designed now of 90s icons,
Mhm.
and all hand drawn. And I just thought it was gorgeous. So then I shared it with you, and we were just talking about it for a while. And we were just, I loved what you had to say about it, because a lot of the times, if someone is really into tarot, specifically where we're at in LA, it is kind of they're very into it. So when they find out I like tarot, it almost becomes like I'm being quizzed on how much I know about it, and I know very little, minus I like certain decks and the art, and I
Right.
use it that way. But I think the important part with a tool is we use these things in the way that benefits us. There is
Yeah.
no right or wrong way to really use them, and I think that's the important point I wanted to get
Yeah.
across.
Yeah, I love that point, and I think that is really important. Because I think that whatever the reason that you're drawn to it, you're drawn to it, and you find it beautiful, and you're able to take something out of it. And I think that's how tools are. Their tools aren't ever really the same in different people's hands. And so we all kind of have our unique way that we're able to use a tool. And I do agree that, there is a kind of an area where people kind of feel, because I think it is something that you can study it on a very, very deep level. And there's a lot of information and insight that can be gained the more you do that. And so I think for people that have really studied it, it means something to them in a different way.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it can kind of, maybe seem that if someone is just interested because they, find it interesting for whatever reason, that maybe that's not um, honoring it enough. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I do think that, that a tool is useful if it's useful to you. And I think specifically divination tools are meant to connect us to our own power. If there's any magic in it, it's really kind of believing in your own magic and believing that you have the answers already. And so I think that with that, we also have to give people space to use them in the way that's most effective for them.
Right. And I mean, I think even the thing I see as a common trait between all the ways I know people use tarot cards is that self exploration. Because even if people believe that it's telling the future, they're getting their futures told so that they can self reflect to either prepare themselves or try to change their future, whatever it is. And if people are just using it as I know most of the people I know, even if they have studied it and do the whole tarot readings and all that stuff, uh, they mostly use it as a reminder tool. Each day they'll kind of flip over a card and just reflect on what that card means to them, how it makes them feel based on the art, based on what they know. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that self exploration and how it relates to them, I think that's the key is when I look at the cards, it makes me feel a way, and then I think about how it's making me feel and understanding myself better and how I react to certain images, certain colors,
Yeah.
certain patterns.
Yep.
Um, and you just learn a lot, if not on an intellectual level, on an emotional and a subconscious level.
Definitely. And I think as you were talking, I was thinking about people that use it a lot of times for like a daily insight tool, and it really kind of brought me back to people who are Christian or whatever your faith is, and you use that sacred text as a divination tool. So a lot of times people will go through and find a specific scripture or kind of just open the page and whatever they're called to read for that day, and find some insight and a message in that, or find some way to set an intention for their day around that message. And so I think it's actually much more similar to what we're kind of traditionally used to for ways of finding insight, seeking it through spirituality, than I think people realize. But because it's something that's unfamiliar, I think a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
it can seem a little bit scary, but I don't think it's that much different. As you were talking about it, I was just like, there's definitely um, some similarities there.
Yeah, and I think what I love about this conversation is that mindfulness makes everything a tool. And I feel that's how I try to view everything that comes in my path is it's a tool that I can use for good or for evil. And I define those things very specifically in that evil is anything that causes myself or others to suffer. Where good is anything that reduces myself or others' suffering. And I think there's that choice, and there's many different ways to use each tool, but we're talking about tarot cards, we're talking about sacred text. I know people who do it with science. I mean,
Oh,
they'll literally the read the thermodynamics, like the theory, and that gives them that spiritual awareness and self-awareness. Like everything we that comes our way can be used as a positive tool. We just have
yeah,
to, one, choose
right.
to do that, and to have the mindfulness, the awareness to know what the choices are.
Yeah, yeah. I love that, and I love your definition of good and evil. I really like that because it's such a mindful way to define those two things that I think can be very kind of confusing. But just realizing that something that causes harm to self or others, that's evil. And I think a lot of times also people don't recognize that there's a lot of things that we do and patterns that we have that are causing harm to ourselves. I think a lot of times we focus so much on the evils and evil kind of against someone else. But a lot of times there's a lot of evil that we can um, that we're kind of caught in our own personal cycle. That I think these explorative activities and these tools of self exploration can really help to root out.
Right. And I want to clarify too, just I mean, everyone can have their own definitions of whatever word they want. But for me, good and evil is an action. I don't believe a person or a thing can be good or evil. It's the action that that person does
Yeah,
that
yeah, it's a
does
behavior.
those things.
It's
Because
an
it's
act.
all, I just think it's too, human nature's too complex to box in an actual person as being good or evil. And it's
Yeah,
based on the definition I use. Every person is a mix of both. It's
hmm,
impossible for all your actions to be good because we don't have ultimate awareness.
right,
And
right.
in order to for all of our actions to not cause any kind of suffering, it would require us to have complete awareness. And I even with complete awareness, I don't think just by the state of living we could go through our day without causing any suffering to anything. I think just by being alive, we're to a percentage causing suffering to others and ourselves. So
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely agree with all of that. And talking about tools, unless you want to continue with talking about divination, I think it would be a good time to switch gears to talking about this new iPhone, because this is
yes,
a tool
right.
that I think can be used for either. And oftentimes it's a mix of both at all times.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting because I have an iPhone 6s,
Yes.
and I've had it I think 2 years now, and it. I mean, I do work on there. I do spiritual practice. I look for quotes. I mean, it's I think phones. I think technology is just so ingrained in our culture now that it very much is an extension of self, with all the good and bad evil that brings.
Yeah.
But I just find it interesting whenever a new iPhone comes out because I'm also not. I use PC. I use Apple. I'm not attached to any kind of brand or anything like that. But
Mm,
the 6S has literally everything I would ever need, plus a million extra things I don't. Like I'm not a heavy phone user. Like I enjoy my phone, but I can easily not have it for days. I don't need emoji features and all these crazy stuff. Um,
mm,
but yet the iPhone X comes out and I see it, and some parts of me are just like shiny. I want it, and I think it's just an interesting human psychosis in a way. And I'm aware enough that I can tell when I'm just being distracted by something shiny and when I actually need or want something genuinely for a good reason. But
Hmm.
I find it so interesting that no matter how aware of it I get every time a new iPhone comes out, I'm like, ooh, shiny, I want it.
Yeah, I can 100% relate to that, just that interest in something shiny. And I think that that's just a big part of human nature. I think that we have what we need, but we oftentimes just want more. And that's just kind of that struggle. And I think that, you're a lot further along than a lot of us because you're more aware of it. And you're able to kind of recognize that and see, like, I have everything I need in this phone. And yet I'm like, my eyes light up when I see this new thing. And for me, it's hard because I think that, like, that's an area where I've definitely had to do a lot of work around. Just around possessions and around things. And I think that for a lot of us, having certain things gives us a sense of security.
Right.
I don't know if it's real security. I think it's oftentimes an illusion of security, but there certain things create this kind of illusion or sense of security. And I think depending on how you grew up, depending on what you had, or have, it can be even that much more difficult to kind of manage that relationship, with items and possessions, and having possessions. And for me, that's something I've really had to work on because I can definitely relate to loving shiny, pretty things. I would say that, like, I really like Apple products. And I mean, I like the intuitiveness of them, and I like that they're, all pretty the same. But at the same time, I just really like how they look. I think they're pretty. And that's something that I've always been drawn to. And so, kind of having to find that balance of recognizing it's okay to want to have things that I like and have things that feel nice to use and look good, but at the same time, I have to be mindful that I'm not choosing the aesthetics over actual substance. You know,
Right.
and that can be a challenge because I think a lot of times too we're so, um, with the iPhone, with the invention of the iPhone, and with how much we're using it now, we're so connected to what everybody else is doing and what everybody else has. And so you think about, 30 years ago, people compared maybe each other's cars and different things like that. But it's like now social media is such a big part of our daily lives that people are kind of constantly showing off our possessions or showing what we have. And I think that it kind of increases that desire to have those things even more. And so it's like we're kind of competing with, I think, a lot of forces that can make it kind of difficult to not chase the shiny things.
Right. And I think you're talking about the comfort of it. And advertising is just so a part of our daily minute. I'm gonna say it's not even daily life. It's like everything we do now has advertising before the internet, and I mean maybe on TV, on the radio, but now everywhere you go, there's billboards. There's everything on all social media has ads. Like it's very rare you're going minutes without being exposed to that, and we're constantly being told that that these products that these material objects are an extension of who we are.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the desire really seems to come from for a lot of people is I need this because it somehow gives me more self-worth, or
Yeah.
it defines who I am, so I need the best, the newest,
Hmm.
the prettiest thing because then I am all those things.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's such an important point. We really, really identify with what we have. And I think you're right that's how we're conditioned to see it. That's what we're conditioned to kind of feel is what's really of value, and what gives us value, is what we have. And it's hard to not link those two things and not kind of get caught up in that cycle.
Right. It's interesting too because I work for Instagram, so I do some of the design elements and help with. What I'm trying to do is move advertising specifically on Instagram more to an inspirational, non ad based place. So getting
Nice.
advertisers to instead of focusing on the ad, focusing on bringing some kind of positive substance to people's feeds. And
Okay.
so that's a whole different topic. But I'm required to have a new. My phone can't be older than 2 years old
Mm.
from its release date.
Oh, wow.
So I have to get another phone. So when the iPhone X came out, I was kind of looked at it and I was like, yeah, it has a lot of features that I will never use. It has some things that, I mean, I prefer my iPhone 6S to. And
Hmm.
so I was looking at other models and I went, what is it? The Galaxy S8, which is pretty much in the testing and the specs very similar. So I put on Facebook that I was thinking of switching from Apple for the first time to
Oh,
this.
God.
And it was just interesting the
Everyone says
responses
it.
in people hold so dear to the fact that this is part of their identity and the sides that I'm like, guys, it's just a phone with like very similar specs. Like it just got so serious and so
Yeah.
intense, and it's just it's interesting to me that people are so passionate about material objects that and situations that have no effect on them. And we see that everything with people
Yeah.
and having opinions about everything, no matter if it affects them in any way or not. But I think that's all just very connected, and
Yeah.
it's an interesting human psychological study of how.
It is. It really is. And I think it's also, I think it's a lot easier to be emotional about iPhones than things that are actually going on. I think there is kind of that dynamic of that we do throw our emotions into things that really don't matter that much and then kind of distance ourselves from things that are actually really emotionally jarring. You see
Mhm.
that a lot with how much we really throw ourselves into like sports and how much it can really mean to somebody how their team is doing, but then kind of be cut off from things that are going on in our lives. And I think some of that is just um coping. you
Right.
know I think part of it is how we cope, but I do think that with these very, very expensive items, I think we have to be mindful of how we're using that. And is this really, something that's actually a value, or can, you know what I mean? And so it's like, I think that, yeah, I think some of that is displaced emotion.
Right. I think that is definitely part of it, and I think the other part of it is that identity issue is
Yeah.
that if you have Apple products, a lot of people feel that is extension who they are. So if you
Mhm.
say, "Oh, I'm an Apple user and I'm going to Android," I think there's this subconscious reaction of you're rejecting me because I am this iPhone is an extension of me and you don't want it. So you
Mhm.
are rejecting me. And I mean, it sounds crazy, but I think that
Yeah.
is kind of the subconscious reaction a lot of
Yeah.
people
Yeah, I mean,
have.
definitely, I can definitely see some of that. And I will admit that I am one of those people that when someone says they're switching over to Android, I'm like, oh, the horror. What are you doing? How are we going to communicate? We're not going to be able to have iMessage, blah, 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 blah. I celebrated when my mom got an iPhone like this last, like 6 months ago. And, now she's like all about it. And so it's funny because I can relate to that. And I think it's, at the end of the day, it's totally meaningless. And yet, in the moment, I feel like I care.
Right. Yeah.
you know so
Uh,
but I will say, again, I'm very, very drawn to those shiny things. And so I didn't watch the video. I haven't watched anything about it. I don't know any of the specs, and I still want it. I
right.
still want that phone. Like, I'm like, but it's so pretty.
Well, it's a
Look
thousand
at
dollars. So.
I know. And I'm just like, I'm not going to get it anytime soon because I replaced my phone like, I don't know, 6 months ago. So it's not time, but I know it's it,
Yeah.
I still feel that that
And it's
desire. I'm
it's
still coveting it.
it's yeah. I'm interested to see how, and I'm sure I could do research and kind of someone's had to do research on this, but I think for a while smartphones were all kind of uh, on the same level of price and kind of what they had to offer, yeah, there was varying levels, but you didn't have these $1,000 phones that really are not something a majority of Americans can purchase. And I think now with I'm interested to see if it creates more of a kind of class struggle, or if it
Yeah,
I
but they
mean, it's just interesting now that it's just there's just such a big divide between what people can have.
mm,
Yeah,
yeah, but
I
I also
mean,
think with the iPhone, I mean, all of them have been rather expensive. I don't know how much the 7 was because I didn't pay that much attention to it, but I know it was probably at least 700, 650, somewhere around there. They've been pretty pricey, and $1,000 is a lot of money, but then we have to also point out that a lot of times phone companies make it easy for you to get a very expensive phone by doing, a payment where you put it on your bill. And so
right.
there are people who will be able to just go in and buy the phone and swipe their card and just buy the phone outright. And then they're also going to make it as accessible to people who maybe can't actually afford it, or
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be able to afford it, by being able to like owe AT&T for 2 years, on this phone, and be
Yeah.
paying it like you're paying on a car. So,
The other interesting thing that I'm just thinking about now that someone commented at work is, and I don't really have an opinion on this. I just thought it was interesting. Someone was commenting on how their 11-year-old niece was getting the iPhone X, and I was
mm-mm.
just thinking, when I was a kid, there was nothing. I mean, we had a family computer, but there would be never a product I would have that was $1,000, and it's just interesting. Yeah, it's just interesting to me that the dynamic of now that just of where the world's moving, that these devices are now much more individual, and starting at a much younger age, that you have
Hmm.
these type of technological devices that, yes, we consider are an extension of self and all these things. It's very interesting.
It is very interesting. And I mean, you see, you go to the airport and you see like a line of like little kids, like that could be maybe under like 5 or 6 years old, with their little personal iPad that they're watching. And, everybody's kind of, it gets younger and younger that people have access to these devices, and that's part of the norm, that it's just
Yeah.
not out of the ordinary that a little one is using, $1,000 level of tech device, for themselves. And it's one of those things where we're not going to undo it. We're not going to go backwards. And so I think it's just kind of thinking about how we're using them, how we're allowing
Yeah.
kids to use them, the access. Because I don't know, for me, with things that have access, like open access to the internet, I just think that, with kids, there's always a risk. But at the same time, that's where things have been. So,
Right. Yeah, and I think it's I mean, I guess it's a double-edged sword, because I know even my niece and nephews, when they were in preschool, had iPads at preschool, because that's where they learned to read. They didn't learn to read from a book. They learned to read from an iPad. And I mean, I have no opinion on that. They're learning to read. That's the main point of it. But it's just, yeah, and the multi-use of it, I think, is an interesting part of it too. Because when we were young, yeah, we had computers, but we read from books, and we had a separate phone, and we had
mhm,
a separate way to listen to music, and everything was kind of
right.
separated into device. Where now
Yeah.
it's literally one device that does everything that we need, and I put quotes around need, at all times.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting place that we're in now. Because yeah, I remember, being a kid, and like I might have had like a little, game that had like some, was kind of a computerized game or something, but you did it for that one thing, and then you had to go and like pick up a telephone to make a call. And it's like now everything is rolled into this one device that we're staring at all day long and kind of giving our attention to all the time. And I think for me, the what I see, that I think my biggest concern is that Because I think kids are learning, kids are still using them to learn. So I think that that's fine. But I think my biggest concern is that we're a lot more disconnected from each other when we're staring at our own
Mm-hmm.
personal device. And so I think that we really do lose that ability to kind of connect just interpersonally with with the level of technology that we're at. So we have to kind of work even harder for that and those
Right.
connections.
Yeah, and I think my uh, fear around just where technology is going is that, I mean, we saw with the iPhone X, there's this whole they Apple's made it very clear that they think that the future is in augmented reality, and we keep getting more and more down the path that we actually spend more time in a virtual space than we do in the real world, and
Mm,
just the effects of us spending more time in in a world that's not real,
yeah.
as opposed to a physical reality. I just, I don't want to say it's my fear. I just, what I fear is that I don't know what that means.
Right.
It's I'm
Yeah.
uncomfortable with it because I don't know, is that a good thing? What's the effect going to be? Where does that end? Like, I'm
Hmm.
an interesting plot that's being used, I think, a lot now in TV and film is the virtual reality, and this idea of, well, where's the line between, for humans, between what they feel is real versus what isn't real, and what happens when the virtual world becomes the place you prefer to be, or the safer place than the the real world, and what are the risks in there, what are the benefits.
Hmm.
Because, I mean, I think it's important to stay balanced, and what I like in this conversation is neither of us are hating on smartphones at all. I love my smartphone.
Yeah.
I think you can definitely have, I mean, I'm a minimalist, but I think you can definitely have as many material items that you want, as long as you're staying mindful about how you're using them and understanding why you purchase them, why you're using them, all those things. As long as it's being done mindfully,
Yeah.
it's gonna, you can use it for positive change.
Mhm.
But I have no idea where I was going with this. I
That's all
changed
right.
subjects halfway through and then forgot
No,
what I said
no,
before.
it's all right. I mean, I think I think it all matters, and I think what you were saying is that we don't know where this is going because
Right.
you can just see that it's changing. You can see that we're spending more time in this world, and that's just kind of where things are going. And it's like, well, what does that mean? And I think
Mm-hmm.
we don't know, and so I think that's the question. That's kind of the part that, yeah, makes me a little concerned. It's like, okay, well, where does this go? How do we evolve in this new space? I mean, I tell people all the time that I think, a couple hundred years from now, they're going to be able to look at humans and how we've evolved and really see a huge change when computers and technology, and that boost 30 years ago that happened. So I think we really don't have any idea, but things are definitely different and continuing to change.
Right.
But that's kind of what always happens. Things
Yeah.
do constantly change. So
And I think the fear comes from, I mean, humanity just having a very spotty history of how it uses technology. That, I mean,
mhm.
we use a lot of it for great things to help people and to stop suffering, and we use a lot of it to cause endless amounts of suffering. So it's just always, I always kind of approach it with a little caution, because I don't know what the motives are behind it.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
Well, that
But
was
I'm
interesting.
positive
Yeah.
that it can be used for good, because I think the other thing that the positive thing I see in it is, it has, and this is a positive and a negative, it has connected us a lot more. And if mindfulness is focused on more, I think we can really move quickly to a more compassionate, empathetic way of life, because of that.
Yeah.
um, and we just have to not let uh, fear and hate and panic divide us in us being more connected.
Yeah. 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 I definitely agree. I think we have to do it with intention. We have to intentionally use the tools as a way to stay connected and to do that work and to move into it and move it in a positive direction. Because I think when we're not intentional, things don't things don't happen in that way. We have to be intentional about how we're using it and how what kind of change we want to affect.
Mm-hmm.
Because things are changing no matter what. And so it's kind of like what do I want my change impact to be?
Right, and be open to knowledge and understanding what you're using. I think what I see is, and I don't know, I just think it's interesting that technology keeps advancing, yet the vast majority of the population understands less and less and less about the technology they use.
Mm,
And I think it's hard to be intentional if you don't actually understand that technology. And I'm not saying you have to be able to build an iPhone or know laws of physics, but just having the general a general knowledge of
mm,
why it was created,
yeah.
how it was created, where it's trying to go, I think really helps in being able to use it mindfully.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
So I guess the homework is, how do you feel about the iPhone 10?
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Is it shiny enough for you?
uh,
Yeah, no. And also, do you use any divination techniques? Do you use any affirmation cards? Do you use tarot cards? Do you do anything else? Yeah, how do you kind of connect with your own sense of magic?
mhm. And with lots of homework this week.
Uh,
I'm also just I'm curious how people define self.
uh,
Not necessarily their personal self, but just in a person's self. Um, yeah, because I guess I gave the definition for good and evil, but I'm trying to think of how I would define self, and I thought I would have a clear definition, but now talking about the extensions of self in material objects and this thing, yeah, I would have to really think about it because I have no
yeah,
idea right now.
because yeah, I don't know either, but I definitely will do some reflection on that for next week.
Yeah, yeah, sounds great.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for
Thank you
joining
guys.
us, and we'll be back next week.
All right. See you then.
Have a good one.